Seville, a world-weary and sickly young woman, had long lost interest in everything. Her life was stagnant and devoid of purpose, until one fateful day, her father, in a rare gesture, sent her a special gift, an unassuming mermaid. For the first time, as Seville gazed into the creature's pure emerald green eyes, she felt a spark of something unfamiliar, interest. The innocent mermaid, who seemed untouched by the world's darkness, became the subject of Seville's obsession. Under her twisted care, the mermaid began to change, slowly falling for his captor in his innocence. However, just as the mermaid surrendered to love without reservation, he was taken away. When they reunited, the once pure mermaid had transformed into a dark and broken man. Before the mermaid's arrival, Seville's life had been utterly desolate. Her parents' love was absent. Her mother was frail and confined to a room, forbidden to leave, while her father was controlling and indifferent. When her mother died, her father, suddenly burdened by her final wish to care for Seville, developed a twisted form of affection. He sent her one pet after another, and if she refused, he would have the animals preserved as specimens before sending them back. Seville sank deeper into despair, inheriting her mother's fragile constitution and lack of attachment to life. She longed for death and despised her father for imprisoning her mother. In her diary, she repeatedly vowed never to become like him, a madman who disguised cruelty as love. Then came the day her father sent the mermaid. Expressionless, Seville ordered her father to leave as the gift was unveiled. Her gaze froze upon seeing the mermaid, floating serenely in a tank of water. The creature opened his eyes, revealing a purity so stunning it seemed otherworldly. His emerald green eyes shimmered, untouched by any stain of cruelty. The mermaid gazed at Seville with innocent curiosity. As Seville approached the tank, her usual cold demeanor gave way to dangerous excitement. Her deep, fiery eyes betrayed a suppressed frenzy, and for the first time she felt the darkness of her father's bloodline awaken within her. "Thank you, Father," she murmured. After the household staff departed, Seville introduced herself to the trembling mermaid. Despite the fear in the creature's eyes, she spoke to him softly, sharing her painful past, the imprisonment of her beloved mother, her twisted father, and her own existence in this wretched cage of a home. She confided her longing to escape, to one day see the ocean beyond their house with the mermaid by her side. For a month, Seville spoke to the mermaid daily, but her desire soon grew darker. One day, unable to bear his silence any longer, she demanded that he speak. She threatened to drag him out of the tank to force him to breathe through his lungs. "Do you want that?" she asked, her voice twisted with excitement. The mermaid, trembling with fear, tearfully confessed his name. Mel. The sound of Mel's voice was so sweet that Seville became completely obsessed, watching him weep with admiration. To her astonishment, she discovered something not mentioned in any of the books about mermaids. Their tears turned into pearls. In the days that followed, Seville devoted herself entirely to Mel. She spent her time observing him, documenting every detail of his daily routine. Yet despite her efforts, she noticed he hadn't eaten since his arrival. She offered him fish of all kinds, but he never touched them. This filled Seville with anxiety. She feared that, like her mother, Mel might retreat into silence and distance himself from her. One day, Mel became entirely unresponsive, sinking quietly to the bottom of the tank. Seville's anxiety reached a breaking point. She was consumed with a desperate urge to make him respond, even if it meant ripping off his scales one by one just to hear him scream. In her frustration, she hurled her notebook into the tank, shouting wildly, "I'll feed you. I'll put you to sleep. I'll talk to you. If you want me to crawl, I'll crawl. If you want me to cry, I'll cry. I can even give you my family. I can give you anything, anything but your freedom." Terrified by her outburst, Mel began to cry, his tears once again turning into pearls. The commotion drew the attention of the knight standing guard outside the door. When he entered to investigate, Seville coldly ordered him to leave, her expression unyielding. "No one is allowed to look at my mermaid, not even for a moment," she said firmly. The butler, concerned about Seville's deteriorating mental state, reported her behavior to her father. He warned that her increasing obsession with the mermaid was taking a toll on her health and that the situation could soon spiral out of control. The next day, Seville woke to find the water tank empty. The sight broke her. The mermaid was gone. Overwhelmed with despair, her fingernails dug into the maid's arm as she demanded, "Where did you hide my mermaid?" She learned that Mel had been taken to the lake by her father. Without hesitation, she rushed to the lake, where an agonizing scene awaited her. Mel, her mermaid, was bound to a blade, his fate seemingly sealed. When Mel caught sight of Seville, his eyes filled with an almost unbelievable surprise. "Seville," he called out, his trembling voice carrying her name for the first time. The sound was soft and fragile, like a feather falling gently to earth, landing squarely on her heart. The unreserved dependence in his tone put her in a trance. In that moment, Seville became resolute. She was his entire world. Defying her father's authority, Seville's gaze turned sharp and unwavering, sweeping across the knights wielding swords. "Put the sword away," she commanded, her tone cold as steel, "before I sever your wrists." Slowly she crouched down, moving with the tenderness one might show to a fragile treasure, and carefully cradled Mel in her arms. The butler, reluctant but yielding, told Seville to return home. He warned her not to be deceived by the mermaid again, cautioning that continuing this obsession would only weaken her body. Seville met the butler's gaze, her eyes filled with a crazed possessiveness and an unyielding warning. "Is my father trying to take away what is mine?" she asked, her voice dripping with menace. "Anyone who dares to touch my mermaid will lose their eyes. And if they go further, I'll take their hands as well. Remember this. I will never let anyone take him from me. He is mine, and mine alone." The butler began to protest, but Seville silenced him. "If you take him away," she said, her voice unwavering, "I will curse you with my dying breath." Her burning obsession blazed in her eyes, as though she was ready to watch the entire world burn to protect Mel. Finally, the butler conceded and left. Seville turned her focus to Mel, softly coaxing him to return to the water. She patiently explained that the lake was fresh water and could harm his health. But Mel, shaken and in tears, shook his head firmly. He insisted on staying, assuring her that his body could tolerate fresh water. Seeing his tears stirred something unexpected in Seville. The way he cried was breathtaking, filling her with a mix of morbid admiration and a painful ache in her chest. She leaned closer and gently kissed away his tears, her voice softening as she promised to honor his wishes. "I'll visit you every day," she assured him. But upon returning home, Seville fell ill. Though her father begrudgingly accepted Mel's presence, he refused to allow Seville to leave the house in her weakened state. Fearing her condition might harm Mel, Seville compromised. She began writing daily letters to Mel, entrusting the maid to deliver and read them to him at the lake. Days passed, but each time the maid returned, she reported with downcast eyes that Mel had not responded. Seville's condition worsened that day. The maid watched with a worried expression, but behind her facade, she had tampered with Seville's medication. Unaware of this betrayal, Seville drank the poison and fell into a deep sleep. Seville didn't notice the maid's face, twisted with a morbid obsession. "Mel wants to return to the sea," she whispered to Seville. "Once you die, I can take him back to the sea." When Seville woke, her head was pounding. The room was dim, illuminated only by the flickering light of candles, and eerily empty. The maids were gone. It felt as if she had been abandoned or left for dead. Realizing no one was around to stop her, Seville, despite her weakness, made her way slowly toward the lake. At the lake, Duffin, the maid was angrily throwing stones into the water. She called out to Mel, frustration evident in her voice. "Why haven't you come out these past days?" As the familiar silhouette of Mel floated near the surface, Duffin's expression shifted to one of obsessive delight. Mel emerged, his curiosity piqued. "Why are you here at this hour?" he asked. Duffin's eyes gleamed with undisguised excitement as she proclaimed, "I've killed Seville." Her tone carried the thrill of someone who believed they had achieved something grand. Mel froze, his shock like a bolt of lightning. He couldn't process the words. Duffin, misunderstanding Mel's silence, continued. Now that she's dead, you can return to the sea, can't you? Mel's heart sank, and guilt overwhelmed him. Though Seville had been the one to imprison him, he knew she didn't deserve such a fate. Memories of her warmth, her daily visits, and her care resurfaced. She was flawed, but she had shown him devotion in her own way. She didn't deserve this, he murmured, his voice breaking. Duffin scoffed. You're a fool, she spat. But Mel was trembling, despair clouding his emerald green eyes. She became like that because of me, Mel whispered, his voice heavy with sorrow. Duffin's expression darkened, her obsession growing more evident. Without warning, she grabbed Mel by the hair, trembling with excitement. You're finally mine now, she declared, her voice filled with twisted triumph. In the next moment, Seville suddenly appeared behind Duffin and struck her. Duffin collapsed, unconscious. Mel stood frozen, overwhelmed by confusion and shock. Seville crouched in front of him, gazing at him as if he were the most precious treasure in the world. I missed you so much, she said fervently. It turned out that Seville had been at the lake all along, hiding in the shadows. When Mel emerged from the water to speak with Duffin, a storm of uncontainable emotions surged within her. Extremes of possessiveness and rage. In Seville's mind, Mel belonged in the tank, always within her reach, hidden from the eyes and touch of the world. No one else could have him. Even in death, Mel's place was by her side. Seville had assumed that upon hearing Duffin's confession, Mel would feel relief or gratitude for Duffin's demise. But when she saw the sadness in Mel's expression, she froze. The sheer depth of Mel's sorrow caught her off guard, piercing her heart in a way she hadn't expected. How could Mel grieve for her after everything she had done? As Seville approached with a stick, she saw the maid clinging to Mel. Mel tried to explain. You became like this because of me, he said, his voice trembling. I have an ability to deceive people, but I haven't grown up yet, so I don't know how to control it. This is all my fault. Seville let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. No, I was born this way, she replied. It's in my blood, a madness, an ancestral possessiveness. Everyone in my family is like this. At that moment, Duffin regained consciousness and lunged at Seville, pushing her into the lake. Mel watched in stunned horror, his body paralyzed as he hung helplessly over the water. The blood in his veins seemed to freeze as his eyes locked on Seville's sinking figure, reflected in the rippling surface. In that instant, it felt as though his entire world was crumbling. Without thinking, Mel instinctively moved to dive in after Seville, but Duffin grabbed him, holding him back. Now's your chance, Duffin urged. Come with me and leave her behind. Mel broke free, his face contorted with anger. I never wanted Seville to die, he shouted. I won't go with you. Hurt, Duffin turned away and fled. As she left, she knocked over an oil lamp, spilling its contents. The flames spread quickly, consuming everything in their path. Meanwhile, Seville continued sinking to the bottom of the lake. In her mind, a single thought echoed. Will I die silently? Like this? Through blurry vision, Seville caught sight of Mel. Those emerald green eyes, now filled with both terror and desperation, locked onto her own. At that moment, Seville felt a deep pang in her chest. She had trapped Mel in this lake, convinced that Mel hated her for it. But now, the fear and concern in Mel's gaze were undeniable and painfully real. As water filled Seville's nose and suffocation began to overwhelm her, Mel leaned down, pressing his lips to Seville's. He shared his breath, keeping her alive. Seville's heart was torn between despair and longing. She craved the warmth of Mel's presence, the lifeline pulling her back from the abyss. But deep inside, she knew that if she survived, her possessiveness toward Mel would only grow stronger. When Seville woke, she found herself lying in a familiar room. The maids stood nearby, their faces filled with panic. She glanced up at the chandelier on the ceiling, a sight so familiar it left her momentarily dazed. Tears slid down her cheeks as the realization struck her. She was still alive. Mel had saved her. The Duke stood by, his expression one of concern. Seville immediately asked about Mel's whereabouts, her voice filled with urgency. The Duke hesitated, then spoke with difficulty. "There was a fire at the lake," he began. "Mel swam desperately to the shore to save you. When he saw the approaching crowd, he tried to call out for help, but the smoke choked him. After a fit of violent coughing, his voice was hoarse and strained. Still, he fought to bring you to safety." The Duke's voice faltered as he continued. "Mel was badly burned. His scales are cracked, and the doctor says he has lost his voice. He might never speak again." Seville's face twisted in pain as the weight of the Duke's words sank in. Guilt and self-blame consumed her. She had caused this. Mel's suffering was the price of saving her life. The injured Mel was placed back in the tank. His body and face were wrapped in bandages, and the once beautiful shimmer of his tail had faded, becoming dull and cloudy. Seville was overwhelmed with guilt, blaming herself entirely. "I'm someone who wanted to die," she thought. "I didn't deserve to be saved by Mel. He must regret saving me." Yet when she looked up to meet his gaze, she saw something unexpected, pure happiness. There was no resentment in Mel's emerald green eyes, only genuine joy that Seville was alive. For a moment, the sight rendered Seville speechless, as though her throat had closed. Mel is too kind, she thought. He values all life, even forgiving someone like her so easily. Swallowing her emotions, Seville forced herself to speak harshly, reprimanding Mel. "You shouldn't have saved me," she said coldly. "You can't even protect yourself, so what makes you think you're worthy of saving others?" Mel froze, his expression filled with hurt and sadness, but Seville pretended not to notice, continuing her mocking tirade. "Do you regret saving me?" she pressed. "Humans treat you so cruelly. You should have let me die. Saving someone like me will only bring you pain." Seville's words were cutting, but her intentions were clear. She wanted to ensure that Mel would never harm himself again to save someone else. Even if Mel came to hate her for this, Seville was willing to be the villain to protect him. She went on to warn Mel about the darker side of humanity. "There are many bad people," Seville explained. "If someone other than me had captured you, you would have faced far worse. Even if you were on fire, no one would have cared enough to save you." To protect Mel in the future, Seville handed him the family's token. "I promise," she said softly, "before I die, I'll send you back to the sea. And if someone else ever takes you, this token will ensure they think twice before hurting you." Knowing Mel couldn't speak at the moment, Seville decided to teach him how to read and write. At first, she thought Mel might refuse to cooperate. To her surprise, he showed great interest and proved to be exceptionally talented. His memory was nearly photographic, allowing him to learn remarkably quickly. Those days were the most peaceful the two had ever shared. For a brief moment, Seville felt a fleeting illusion of normalcy, as if life was no longer so grim, and in Mel's eyes she thought she glimpsed something new, a faint trace of attachment directed toward her. Seville's health was worsening day by day. The maid began pulling the curtain shut during every lesson to shield Seville from the outside world. Doctor visits were conducted discreetly, with their discussions hidden behind code words. The Duke, desperate for a solution, changed doctors almost every 3 days, but none of the treatments brought relief, and Seville's pain only deepened as her physical condition deteriorated. One day, determined to push through her fatigue, Seville drew back the curtain around the tank and resumed teaching Mel. The lesson took an unexpected turn when the topic of family came up. Mel's eyes lit up with excitement as he exclaimed, "I have a family." He quickly wrote the word sea on the glass, explaining that the sea was his family. Seeing Mel's happy, nostalgic expression filled Seville with an even greater sense of guilt. She lowered her gaze but suddenly noticed something disturbing. The water tank was full of Mel's scattered scales. She froze, realizing the terrible truth. If Mel remained in the tank any longer, his condition would only worsen. Resolving to take action, Seville forced herself to speak firmly. "You have to go back to the lake," she said. She then called for someone to prepare Mel for transport. Mel, panicked, called out Seville's name. Seville stopped in her tracks, stunned by the sound of it. She thought Mel could not speak anymore, but here he is calling her name. She turned and stared at Mel, her expression unreadable. Mel fidgeted nervously under the intense gaze and hurriedly tried to explain. "I don't want to leave," he said, his voice trembling. But before Mel could finish, Seville interrupted him coldly. "I thought we were close," she said, her tone sharp with betrayal. "But you're still lying to me? I thought, well, I guess it was just me." Mel, desperate to explain, tried again to clarify his reasons for hiding the truth. But Seville, refusing to listen, drew the curtain closed with an air of finality and ordered someone to take Mel back to the lake. After Mel left, Seville finally allowed herself to show a sad expression. Her health was deteriorating rapidly, and she could feel that her time was running out. Despite the constant rotation of doctors, there was no improvement. Eventually, the family returned to the same physician, Bormier. Bormier seemed genuinely saddened by Seville's condition. He had personally requested the Duke to bring him back to oversee Seville's treatment. With gentle encouragement and persistence, Seville's appearance improved slightly over the course of a month. Another week passed, and Seville hadn't seen Mel. She missed him terribly. Every week, she wrote a letter and had someone deliver it to the lake. Because of Mel's ability to influence people, only male couriers were sent this time. However, the night reported an unsettling incident. Late at night, they caught a courier wandering alone, clearly under Mel's spell. It became apparent that Mel's ability to confuse and manipulate was not limited by gender. One day, Seville's uncle returned. Though he called himself an uncle, he was the same age as Seville, and the two had been close as children. However, as an illegitimate child, the uncle faced ostracism, with others constantly accusing him of scheming to claim the family fortune. 2 years ago, he left home to make his own way in the world. Now, he had returned, bearing gifts for Seville. Among the presents, Seville picked out a bracelet adorned with a shell, thinking it would suit Mel perfectly. She shared the story of her mermaid with her uncle, who dismissed it as a joke. But before long, the Duke's men called the uncle away for an urgent matter. Later, as Seville returned to her room, she overheard her father arguing with her uncle. It seemed the family had offended someone powerful, and now faced the possibility of being purged by the emperor. The Duke insisted that Seville, as the heir, had a duty to stay and bear the responsibility. The uncle, however, disagreed, arguing that Seville should be taken away from the impending danger. Then came the crushing blow. Seville's father coldly stated that he wouldn't live through the month. "Her life is nearing its end," the Duke said. "As the heir to this family, an honorable death is the best option for her." The blood drained from Seville's face as she stumbled and squatted down in shock. She had envisioned her end countless times, maybe 3 years from now, or perhaps after surviving another winter, celebrating the coming spring with Mel. She had dreamed of watching Mel smile in the sunlight for the first time, but now the cruel reality was like a picture torn apart by a dagger. She had less than a month left. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Amid the chaos of her thoughts, one clear resolution emerged. If my time is so short, then I must send him back to the sea. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to stay tuned for the next part of the story.